This is the second of two videos about how to use a generic outcomes model to implement similar programs in a number of countries, districts, organizational or sector units. In the first video we saw how a country could download the generic model and adapt it and change it within DoView for its own circumstances, and how it could map onto that model the projects which it was currently doing in regard to, in this case, maternal health. What we're going to look at in this video is how to rank whether or not there are problems in regard to steps and outcomes in the model, and then secondly how to identify the priorities for future focus of activity by mapping them onto the model. As you remember, the model we're working with here is a maternal health outcomes model, and the particular area we're looking at is skilled birth attendants working effectively. We have mapped onto them the projects along the bottom, and now what we're going to do is to think about whether or not there are problems in regard to any of these steps within the model. And the first way we do that is to go through and we rate the problems in accordance to this problem rating scale, where 2 pluses mean no problems that need to be noted, 1 plus, no significant problems, a minus and a plus, some problems, 1 minus, significant problems, and 2 minuses, major problems. So looking at our model, we may do this with a big stakeholder group, or we may do it with just some experts, or even one expert could do this rating. And we look across the model, and here we're looking at this step within the model: birth attendants practicing at an acceptable level of competency. And we need to know and make an assessment, a rating of whether or not there's a problem in regard to this area. And let's say that in this particular country there is a problem, so I'll put 2 minuses there because there's a major problem at the moment. Let's try again with birth attendants working in the right geographic location. Say this is also a problem, I'll put a couple of minuses there because it's a major problem at the moment with birth attendants being just located in some areas but not in other areas. And then lastly, we'll look here, birth attendants fully and appropriately utilised. Let's say that in regard to that, in fact, there's no significant problems there, and we can put a plus in there because that's not a big issue at the current time. So you can see how we go through the model, and we could rate up the various other boxes in the model in terms of whether or not there currently is a problem. So once we've done that, we've got a good map there of the steps that we're trying to achieve in order to get through to high level outcomes, but also where the difficult points are in the model and where one could perhaps take action in order to move forward. What we need to do then is a second stage, which is we go through and we map now in terms of thinking about the priorities for future focus. And these won't necessarily be exactly the same as where there are problems, because while there may be a problem in an area, there may not be currently sufficient resources or other reasons why that problem can't be addressed, and it's not necessarily a priority for addressing just at this point in time. So in order to do the priorities, we rank them now on another rating scale, this one at the bottom, priority for focus of future activity, and we have A, highest priority, B, C, D, E, for instance, and then N is the current focus of activity, business as usual. So this really says that we're currently doing some things in this area, almost inevitably we are in regard to projects like this, and we're not making it a priority, but we are going to continue to doing the current level of work which we're doing in that area. So if we go back to our model now, our experts or a group of stakeholders could look at this one here, birth attendants practicing at an acceptable level of competency, and they could decide, well, in fact, that we want to do something about that, but it isn't the highest priority, it's actually a B priority at the moment, so they could put a B in there, for instance. Birth attendants working in the right geographic location, which is a problem because we've got 2 minuses, a major problem there. They might decide that that actually is an A priority, and they really, really need to do something about that. And this one here, birth attendants fully and appropriately utilised, in fact it's a plus there, so there's not any significant problems. And we might put an N there, which just means a normal level of activity, business as usual. It's not one of the priorities, but they definitely will just continue the normal level of activity occurring in regard to that particular step in the model. So now we have ratings, and imagine if we went all the way through our model, it would then look something like this. And what I've got here is the ratings here, ratings for some other elements within the model. And I've also, as you will recall from the first video, I've put in a number of projects which map onto these different steps within the model. So you can see how we can rapidly see that this is an A priority, and there's one project. We can review whether or not this is enough, whether there needs to be another project or more emphasis in order to achieve this A priority in regard to this particular step within the model. This one here is a normal business as usual, so we'd probably leave that as it was with no more projects. This one, of course, draws the eye here because it's actually a B priority, but there's no projects there at the moment. So it may be that we want to put in a project, a birth attendant competency project, we'll just call it at the moment, and we would want to map that onto that because we're going to establish a new project which is mapping onto there. We would change this little number here to 1 because there's now one project mapping on that. And you can see in this, what is a simple example, it would be more complex in reality. There'd be many more projects, but you can see how we can use this approach to systematically work out the model. It was the first step in the first video, the model which works for the country, and then next to map the current projects, and then next to map where there would be problems if we just continue with the current project work, and then to map the priorities for dealing with those projects, and then for those priorities, and then finally moving on to mapping new projects which we may do in order to meet our new priority focus. And in that whole package we have a very clear picture of what it is we're trying to do. In addition to what I've shown you as to how we can use the maternal health outcomes model modelled in DoView, there are a range of other things we can do with such models if we build them in a standardized way. I will not be talking about these in detail, but you can insert indicators onto the model, and here we have inserted some indicators, and I'm drilling down under this one, and I've inserted a JPEG of a graph with student numbers and training of birth attendants over time. I can also put information about where we're going to collect information on indicators. So this is the average qualification of teaching staff and the average length of program in regard to birth attendant teaching schools. And you can see here is an annual survey of birth attendant teaching schools, and we've put the indicators which are going to be collected in that particular survey. I can also put evaluation questions on: is the location of the 3 birth attendant schools appropriate? Or here, how up to date are the teaching resources at the birth attendant teaching schools? How to do all of this is set out on the outcomecentral.org site, where there's information about working with outcomes models to do these additional aspects of modelling. And finally, a country can either just create a PDF with its whole DoView outcomes model within it, with the information we've talked about in these videos, or it can create a web page version, as I talked about in the first video. An international collaborative organisation could then just create another DoView model with a list of hyperlinks out to the individual country models. Here we're looking at a country model for a particular country with the projects, problems and priorities, and we can drill down through that to see the outcomes model, and drill down to see all of the type of material which we have discussed so far, including the model could also include drill downs into talking about individual projects which are going to be undertaken. So this is a generic approach. It could be used in regard to countries, or it could be used in regard to sectors or organisations, anywhere where there's a general project which is going to be applied and adapted in regard to a number of instances.